James Walker, the tech CEO who built an empire from nothing, and Emily Carter, his brilliant and ambitious secretary, shared a secret that would destroy them both. Behind the polished exterior of Silicon Valley success, their affair simmered in the shadows until one fateful night when it turned deadly. What started as a love affair between two powerful individuals spiraled into a desperate attempt to cover up the truth, leading to a murder that shocked the world and unraveled everything James had worked so hard to protect. James Walker was not just a tech CEO. He was a symbol of success. Born into a modest family in the Midwest, his rise to power seemed almost destined. After earning a computer science degree from Stanford, he quickly made his mark in the industry, founding his own company at the age of 28. His breakthrough product, an innovative software that streamlined business processes, was a game changer, making him a millionaire almost overnight. By the time he was 40, his company was one of the most talked-about startups in Silicon Valley. With an impressive portfolio of clients and the kind of media attention that most entrepreneurs only dreamed of. To the outside world, James Walker seemed like the perfect businessman, smart, driven, and visionary. His company's IPO was just around the corner, and everyone was eager to see how he would expand his empire. Investors trusted him, employees admired him, and the press hailed him as a genius. His sleek office, perched high in one of the most expensive buildings in downtown San Francisco, reflected his success. The floor-to-ceiling windows gave him a panoramic view of the city, a daily reminder of how far he had come. But beneath this image of perfection, there was a different story. Walker's personal life, in particular, was far less polished. Married to his college sweetheart, a well-known socialite named Lisa, for over a decade, James had always kept his family life under wraps. The couple had 2 children, a son and a daughter, both still in their teens, but their marriage was increasingly strained. Lisa, often seen at gala events and high society parties, had grown accustomed to a life of luxury, but the emotional distance between her and James was palpable. They lived in a massive home in the hills, but it was clear that their lives were 2 separate worlds. James had long found comfort outside his marriage. His work was his obsession, but in the chaos of running a multi-million-dollar company, he found solace in the company of someone who understood the pressures he faced, his personal secretary, Emily Carter. Emily had joined the company just 2 years ago, an ambitious young woman with a sharp mind and a strong work ethic. She quickly earned Walker's trust, handling everything from scheduling meetings to managing high-profile client communications. Her organizational skills were unmatched, and her ability to anticipate James's needs made her indispensable. Emily was, in many ways, the perfect assistant. She was smart, quiet, and loyal, qualities that made her stand out in the fast-paced, often chaotic world of Silicon Valley. Her beauty, however, did not go unnoticed. At 26, with striking features and a presence that commanded attention, she quickly became a fixture in the office. Walker, always the professional, tried to keep their relationship strictly business. But as the months passed, things began to change. Emily was no longer just an employee. She had become his confidant, someone who knew all his secrets, both personal and professional. She was someone who could challenge him, but also support him in a way no one else could. It started innocently enough, a shared drink after work, a few moments of personal conversation here and there. But as time went on, their relationship deepened. They would share quiet moments in the office late at night, discussing everything from business strategies to their own private lives. Emily, for her part, had always been more than just the dutiful secretary. She had ambitions of her own. She admired Walker's success, but she also believed she could offer him something more, a partnership perhaps, or something even more intimate. The lines between professional and personal began to blur. Neither of them had spoken openly about it, but there was a palpable tension between them. Walker was captivated by Emily's intelligence and her ability to see through the facade of his corporate persona. Emily, meanwhile, was drawn to Walker's power and the aura of success that surrounded him. What started as a friendship turned into a secret affair, one that neither of them could afford to be discovered. But as their relationship deepened, so did the danger of it being exposed. Their affair was carefully hidden from the world. James had always prided himself on being in control of every aspect of his life, and he was determined to keep his secret. But the deeper they got into their clandestine relationship, the more complicated things became. Walker had built his entire life around a public image of perfection, and the last thing he could afford was for that image to be shattered by a scandal. As the months passed, Emily began to feel the weight of their secret relationship more than ever. At first, the thrill of their stolen moments, late-night talks, whispered conversations in dark corners of the office, and quick glances exchanged in crowded meetings had been enough. It was exciting, and in the beginning, it had felt like a brief escape from their separate lives. But as time wore on, the stakes grew higher. What had once been a secret affair became a dangerous game with no clear way out. Walker had always been careful, controlling every aspect of his public persona. He knew how to play the game of high-stakes business, how to protect his reputation, and how to make sure his personal life stayed out of the media. But now the walls were closing in. Emily was no longer content with being just the hidden lover. She wanted more. She had begun to drop subtle hints to Walker that she was tired of being kept in the shadows, tired of living a double life. She wanted to go public, to be acknowledged as more than just his assistant. She wanted to be seen as his equal, his partner. But Walker, ever the strategist, had no intention of allowing that to happen. The company was on the verge of going public, and any scandal, no matter how small, could spell disaster for his plans. Investors, who had backed him for years, were watching his every move. His board members, who already questioned his decisions, would never tolerate such a revelation. And then there was Lisa, his wife. Though their marriage had long been on the rocks, the prospect of an ugly divorce would certainly damage his standing in the business world. Walker had spent years cultivating a life of perfection, one that relied on keeping up appearances. One misstep, one leak could bring everything crashing down. Emily, however, couldn't see it that way. Her feelings for Walker had deepened beyond just desire. She had come to believe that their relationship wasn't just an affair. It was something real, something worth fighting for. She had made it clear that she wasn't content to remain in the shadows forever. If Walker wasn't ready to make their relationship public, she would do it for him. She had been collecting evidence, photos, text messages, emails, anything that could serve as proof of their affair. If he didn't make a move, she would. The more she pressed, the more Walker began to feel cornered. His mind, once sharp and focused on business, now raced with thoughts of how to protect himself from the inevitable fallout. He began to have meetings with his lawyers, trying to figure out how to keep the situation under wraps. His calm, calculated demeanor began to crack as the pressure mounted. Every conversation with Emily became charged with tension. She was growing bolder, pushing harder, and he had no idea how long he could keep up the charade. Behind closed doors, their relationship became a battle of wills. Emily wanted freedom, wanted validation, wanted to be more than just a well-kept secret. Walker, on the other hand, was determined to maintain his empire and keep his personal life buried. He made promises to her, telling her that soon everything would change. That once the company went public and the IPO was successful, they could go public with their relationship. He needed just a little more time, a little more space to finalize the deal. But Emily was growing impatient. Time was running out. As their interactions became more tense, the cracks in their affair became more apparent. Emily's mood swings shifted from love to anger, her resentment building as she felt more and more trapped. She wanted assurances, wanted to be certain that Walker truly cared about her, but he continued to brush aside her concerns. His priority was the company, his future, and his carefully constructed life. The pressure of their escalating conflict was undeniable. Emily's emotional outbursts were becoming harder to hide, and Walker could feel the walls closing in. The more Emily demanded, the more Walker retreated into himself, trying to find a way out of the web they had both woven. But as the stakes grew higher, so did the risk of exposure. Walker knew that the only way to ensure his secret remained hidden was to make sure there was no one left who could expose it, no one left who could destroy everything he had worked so hard to build. And Emily, with her threats to go public, had become the one person who could do just that. The tension between Walker and Emily reached its breaking point in the weeks leading up to the company's IPO. The once steady flow of their secret affair had become increasingly chaotic. Emily's demands grew louder, and Walker's patience wore thin. The strain of keeping up appearances, both in his personal life and within his company, was beginning to take its toll. Emily, unable to silence the mounting frustration in her chest, began to speak more openly about her dissatisfaction with the situation. She no longer wanted to wait. She wanted to be acknowledged, to be seen, to be loved openly. But for James Walker, this was a luxury he could not afford. In private, their conversations were a constant battle. Emily had begun threatening him, not in the typical subtle way of someone trying to leverage their position, but with a cold, biting intensity. She spoke of taking their affair public, of going to the media with their story. Walker, ever the strategist, tried to calm her, promising her that soon things would be different. But Emily, having heard these promises for months, was growing impatient, and the fear of the truth slipping out began to consume her. She had already made contact with a journalist from a major tech magazine, someone with the reach to expose not just their affair, but also the scandalous way Walker had hidden it from the public. Emily believed that if she went public with their relationship, Walker would finally be forced to confront the reality of what they had together. She imagined a life where they could be partners, where she wouldn't have to hide in the shadows, pretending to be just another employee while their secret blossomed in private. She was no longer willing to be Walker's carefully concealed mistress. For Walker, this was the point of no return. The idea of their affair being exposed was a nightmare he couldn't wake from. Everything he had built, the company, his status, his wealth, was riding on his ability to maintain control. He could not, would not, let Emily's threats unravel everything. He had made her promises, and yet she continued to push him. The more she threatened, the more desperate he became. The stakes were higher than they had ever been. Walker's company was in the midst of finalizing its IPO, a critical moment in his career. Any scandal, no matter how minor, could cause investors to pull out, leaving him with nothing. His wealth, his future, and his reputation hung in the balance. His marriage to Lisa, though it had long been strained, was still a public fixture. A divorce would be ugly and damaging. The media would swarm, digging into every corner of his life, and the truth of his affair would come spilling out. Walker couldn't let that happen. In the dark corners of his mind, the solution became clearer. He had always prided himself on his ability to solve problems, to think several steps ahead of his competitors. Now this problem, this threat to his empire, had to be eliminated. But the stakes had shifted. This wasn't just about keeping a secret anymore. It was about survival. Emily had gone too far, and now there was no room for negotiation. While Emily believed she had the upper hand, preparing to release her story, she never saw the shift in Walker's demeanor. He had begun distancing himself from her, no longer responding to her demands with the same urgency. She took this as a sign of him backing down, unaware that he was quietly laying the groundwork for a darker resolution. He could no longer afford the luxury of keeping her in his life. He knew that one move, one piece of information leaking into the public would bring it all down. And so, without a second thought, Walker began to make plans to silence her permanently. It was a chilling thought for someone who had once been the golden boy of Silicon Valley, but as the pressure mounted and the walls began to close in, Walker realized there was no other option. Emily's threats were no longer mere words. They were the catalyst for a choice he couldn't ignore. The night before the article was set to be published, Emily arrived at the office late, as she had done countless times before. She had been under the impression that the late hours would be spent preparing for the company's final push before the IPO launch. James had called her in earlier that day, saying there were last-minute details to go over, and though Emily knew the tension between them was palpable, she didn't hesitate to come. After all, this was her moment, the moment when her years of patience, her quiet endurance through the secrecy of their affair, would finally pay off. She had decided that tonight would be the night she would give him an ultimatum. Either he agreed to make their relationship public, or she would make sure the world knew everything. As Emily entered the building, there was an odd stillness in the air. The usual buzz of late-night office workers, the clatter of keyboards, and the distant murmur of phone calls seemed absent. The hallway lights flickered slightly, casting long shadows down the corridor, but Emily thought little of it. It was just another late night in a building that never seemed to sleep. She made her way to the elevator and pressed the button for the top floor, where James's office was located. When the elevator doors opened, she stepped into the corridor and walked toward the executive wing, where she had spent countless hours, working late at his side. But tonight something felt off. The usual hum of activity was eerily missing. There were no other employees lingering in the hallways, no one walking between cubicles or through the glass-walled conference rooms. It was unusually quiet. She reached James's office door, only to find it slightly ajar. She pushed it open, gently, expecting to see him hunched over paperwork or pacing around in his usual thoughtful manner. Instead, the room was dark. The only light came from the glow of a desk lamp, casting a soft pool of light on the papers scattered across the desk. James wasn't there. Confused, she took a few more steps into the room, her heart beginning to race. She had texted him earlier that evening to confirm the meeting, and he had assured her that he would be waiting. But as she stood there, An unsettling feeling began to creep up her spine. She was alone in a building that felt more like a ghost town than a bustling office. It wasn't long before she heard footsteps approaching from the hallway. As she turned toward the sound, her eyes locked onto James's silhouette. He stepped into the room, his face partially obscured by the shadows. His movements were slow and deliberate, and there was something cold about his expression, something Emily couldn't quite place. He didn't greet her, didn't offer the usual smile or reassuring words. Instead, he just stared at her with a quiet intensity that seemed to freeze the air between them. Before she could speak, he moved closer to her. The tension in the room was palpable, as though every word, every glance was calculated. Emily was suddenly aware of how alone they were in the building. The company, her role, their affair, it all seemed to hang in the balance, and in that moment she realized something was wrong. There was no warmth in James's gaze, no trace of the man she had once trusted. Only cold calculation. "James?" she asked, her voice betraying the uncertainty she now felt. He didn't answer. Instead, he gestured for her to follow him. She felt a pang of confusion, but complied. He led her to the far side of the office building, away from the main conference areas, and into a quieter, less frequented part of the complex. The area had been under renovation for months, the hallways lined with caution tape and half-completed drywall. The building had many such spaces, forgotten corners and unfinished rooms, often used for storage or meetings that required privacy. They stopped in front of a door leading to an unfinished room. The lights inside flickered on as James opened the door, revealing the dim, stark space. Emily stepped inside, her curiosity growing. But as she crossed the threshold, something strange happened. She noticed a sudden, sharp tension in the air. She turned back to see James behind her, his face expressionless. She didn't have time to process the situation before he was on her, moving quickly and decisively. There was no argument, no verbal exchange, just a violent push that sent her stumbling forward. In that instant, the reality of the situation crashed down on her. She had been lured into a trap that had been set by the very man she had trusted most. The struggle that followed was brief but intense. Emily fought back with everything she had, scrambling to get free, to escape the grasp of the man she had once believed would protect her. But Walker was stronger, more ruthless than she could have imagined. He didn't hesitate, didn't waver in his resolve. The struggle ended in a single sickening moment. Emily, gasping for breath, collapsed to the cold concrete floor, her neck twisted at an unnatural angle. The room fell silent, the only sound the faint hum of the building's air conditioning. James stood over her, his breathing steady, his face cold and devoid of emotion. For a moment he simply stared at her lifeless body. The affair, the lies, the endless threats, everything had come to this. The secret was now gone, and the life he had worked so hard to protect was safe, at least for now. James Walker, the man who had once been a symbol of Silicon Valley success, had crossed a line from which there was no return. The morning after Emily's death, the office was buzzing with its usual energy, unaware of the tragedy that had occurred just a few floors above. James Walker arrived early, as he always did, with the air of someone who had his day meticulously planned. He had no idea how the morning would unfold, nor how the events of the previous night would soon unravel his entire life. His world, so carefully constructed, was about to come crashing down, but for the moment he was blissfully unaware. Emily's body was discovered later that day by a janitor, who had been assigned to clean the building after hours. At first, he thought it was just another maintenance issue, perhaps an unfortunate slip or a fall. He quickly called the authorities, reporting an accident at one of the construction sites in the building. The police arrived within the hour, and what they initially assumed was a tragic mishap soon became something far more sinister. The position of the body, the lack of any apparent witnesses, and the strange, out-of-place atmosphere of the building raised immediate red flags. The initial assumption was that Emily had somehow lost her balance and fallen in the dimly lit, partially constructed area of the office. But the forensic team quickly discovered that her injuries were inconsistent with a simple fall. The angle of her neck, the bruising around her wrists, and the abrasions on her arms indicated a violent struggle. Something more than an accident had occurred. The building's lack of surveillance in certain areas, including the construction zone where Emily had been found, made it difficult to piece together the full sequence of events, but the investigators knew they had a crime on their hands. Walker, meanwhile, was dealing with his usual morning routine, preparing for the last stretch before his company's IPO. His phone buzzed with emails from his legal team and investors, but he remained strangely detached. He had prepared for a day filled with meetings, presentations, and final decisions, but the call he would receive that morning would change everything. The police, after gathering enough evidence to connect him to the scene of the crime, had come to his office. He was informed that Emily Carter had been found dead and that he was now the primary person of interest. At first, James was calm, even collected. He insisted that it was an accident, that he hadn't been anywhere near the construction zone when it happened. He told the police he hadn't seen Emily in days, that they had only communicated via email and brief meetings, but the officers weren't convinced. They had learned about Emily and Walker's secret affair, one of the many hidden facts that would soon come to light. And with that revelation, everything changed. A search of Walker's office uncovered more than just business files. There were texts and emails exchanged between him and Emily that painted a much different picture than the story he had told. They had grown closer over time, and it wasn't just a matter of occasional meetings or casual work conversations. There was proof of their relationship, intimate exchanges, the kind that could ruin Walker's career if exposed. But the more the police delved into his background, the more they began to connect the dots. Walker had more to hide than just an affair. Security footage, though incomplete, revealed enough. In the hours leading up to Emily's death, a camera had captured Walker entering the building late that night and leaving in the early hours of the morning. It was a critical piece of evidence, one that directly contradicted his claims of innocence. The footage was grainy, but it showed him walking down the hallway toward the construction zone. The police were able to trace his movements, confirming that he had been in the area shortly before Emily's body was discovered. The forensic evidence only added to the mounting suspicion against him. The investigation quickly took a darker turn. Emily's threats to expose their affair were now known to everyone, and the possibility of Walker having killed to protect his empire was becoming more and more likely. As the police pieced together the timeline of events and examined the evidence, the truth began to emerge. Walker had staged the crime scene to look like an accident. He had been desperate to keep his secret safe, willing to do whatever it took to ensure that Emily would never reveal their affair. In the coming weeks, the full extent of Walker's lies and manipulations were exposed to the public. News outlets ran relentless stories about the tech CEO's dark side, the genius businessman who had built a successful empire, only to have it destroyed by his own crimes. Walker's carefully curated image, the one he had worked so hard to maintain, was shattered. Investors pulled out of the IPO, the company's stock value plummeted, and his reputation, once untouchable, was forever tainted.